Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor of Ultiworld, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me is Ultiworld senior editor Keith Raynor. And yesterday in Minneapolis, Derek Chauvin, the police officer that killed George Floyd, was convicted on all 3 counts by the jury trial. This has been a sort of ongoing trial to be able to follow because they allow cameras in courtrooms in Minnesota. And I think, this has been since the beginning of the pandemic, basically, a huge driver of increased focus in the Ultimate community on social justice issues, the experience of Black people in this country, and of course, police violence. And we've talked about it on the show. Keith, this is kind of the closing chapter of at least this particular incident with George Floyd. What was your reaction yesterday when you heard the news?
I was relieved, and I think a lot of people were. I found myself kind of like my chest tightening as we were getting to the point of reading the verdict, because you're kind of like, for me, I was sitting around listening to pundits talk about it, mostly just waiting to get to the part where we got the verdict, because you never really knew exactly when it was going to drop. And then all of a sudden the judge comes out and he's, reading the 4-person's decision. And it was a tense moment. And I'm glad that we're on the other side of it with the outcome that we are. But there's also a part of me that's like, this should be the baseline. And so right. I kind of don't want to celebrate. It's like, this should be the expectation that, people are held accountable for their actions in a way that's fair and unbiased. And as much as humans can achieve that. So it's nice to see the system work, I guess, the way it's supposed to. It's really unfortunate that a person's life had to be lost for us to get there. And, there have been some really odd public statements from major visible political figures after the fact, talking about George Floyd's sacrifice that I think is poorly thought out, poorly worded phrasing from some folks about that. But ultimately, that I don't think that will matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and I think, people are already talking about this online, that you can't just let this be, okay, we've solved this. Clearly the sort of the broader implications of police violence like this, often going unpunished, has to be reckoned with still. And I think it's harder to maintain that momentum for kind of making the reforms necessary. We talked, I don't know how long it's been. Time is weird right now, but 9-10 months ago, we talked about, qualified immunity and some of the other issues surrounding policing in the United States. And like, those things still are really important to stay focused on, even though this particular thing has come to a close, because, it's not, you don't want to have these situations coming up in the first place. And there needs to be more of a culture in policing of not allowing this kind of behavior to be normalized or covered up or whatever else. And I think, especially as like the COVID pandemic starts to wind down, hopefully in the next couple months, as vaccinations continue here, people are going to be excited to get back out and go out to restaurants and bars and maybe not think as much about politics and some of these issues. And I think it's a good time to think about, all right, well, maybe I'll donate some money to an organization that's working on these issues at all times, because we are likely going to start to be distracted from thinking about this topic. And I could be wrong. I mean, there are going to be people who care about this deeply and stay focused on it, but it's just the nature of things. As a story gets further and further away, people stop thinking about it. I mean, I think about the war in Afghanistan as a topic here. We're about to pull our troops out of Afghanistan. And Americans don't even care about the war in Afghanistan anymore. But like, we've been in the country for like 20 years. And I just think that you get desensitized to this kind of thing. And there's obviously still work that needs to be done to improve the systems in our country.
I think that probably most of our audience doesn't fall into this camp, but there could be folks out there, and not that I'm here to attack them, who might say, why are we talking about this? Like, I come to the Ultimate podcast for a bit of an escape from this kind of political stuff, and I see that in other areas of my life. People who are saying, why do these people in my hobbies have to talk about this very serious political content and social content? It's heavy, and I want to get away from it. And I don't think that that's something that's afforded to everybody. And so I don't feel like that's necessarily what we want to do with our platform, but B, what's owed to people. I think that these are important things to address. And, as a Black person in America, like, you think about how police violence impacts your life and the systems around that oppression impact your life. So it's not something that gets to be turned off at your convenience because it bothers you or whatnot. That discomfort, I think, is important to address. But specifically looking at the Chauvin trial, I think it's one thing that really stood out to me that felt like it could be a sign of a change in the future is that you saw folks from within the policing community speaking out publicly, high-ranking officials speaking out against the type of policing that have been done, when I think one of the biggest problems with policing in America has been the kind of fraternal order, the closed ranks. We're going to deal with the problems within our community ourselves, the lack of policing of the police, so to speak, the who watches the watchman kind of question. And to see that kind of level of accountability, which is something that is being talked about in Ultimate, how do we keep people accountable for their actions and their words and how they impact people? I think that seeing that is an important part of moving forward and something that maybe is indicative of progress.
Yeah. And I hope you're right. I mean, there were literally police officers from Minneapolis that were in the trial that were witnesses for the prosecution. And I agree completely. Like, that's the kind of thing that has to happen if we want to. Obviously, you don't want the situation to have happened in the first place, but if it does, then you want to be able to, have justice served, as we've seen in this case. Anyway, let us know your thoughts. deeplook@ultiworld.com. A lot of Ultimate teams are talking about these issues and have been for many months now. So, going to continue thinking about that and continuing the conversation. Big show today. We're going to be talking with Alyssa Weatherford from Seattle Riot. It's been playing one of the top handlers in the game for over a decade at this point. We've got a little bit of news to get to as well. Right after we recorded our show last week, the news came out that the World Ultimate Club Championships are going to be heading back to Cincinnati in 2022. And that means that we're going to have the beach championships in Los Angeles or Huntington Beach in April. Then we're going to have the World Games in Birmingham, Alabama in July. And then in late July, the World Ultimate Club Championships in Cincinnati. So back-to-back U.S.-based tournaments. First of all, Keith, I mean, Cincinnati, we were there in 2018. We're going back in 2022. Just your thoughts on having the tournament back in the same location that it was 4 years ago. Oh,
let's call up wall to wall. Tell them we're coming back. Indoor championships. Let's do it. We can recapture the magic. But I had the thought last time, and it's kind of a joke. I've spent a lot of time in Cincinnati. I have family from there, but it's not exactly a destination city. And I remember interacting with people at the World Club Championships who were. It was the first time they'd ever left their country. And to think that they went to the U.S. and maybe all they saw was Cincinnati. And not even Cincinnati proper, but like rural Cincinnati. That's a little bit tough of a pill to swallow. I don't blame the World Championship organizers necessarily, because obviously these are extenuating circumstances and making anything work at all is pretty challenging. There probably are different methods and processes that they could have used to try and arrive at where the final location was going to be. But, you know, at least this way, I think finally, with a little bit of help from the committee, the U.S. really has a chance. I think we needed a leg up to be able to compete with the rest of the world. And now I think the U.S. teams, you know, I think with a little bit of help, we might be able to pull it off.
You know, when they have to, the U.S. teams have to travel to Europe or Australia or whatever, you know, it just takes a toll on the team's ability to entirely dominate every contest. And, you know, we want to see the U.S. teams win every game by at least 10 goals. And I think this puts us in a position. Anyway,
you know, the U.S. teams don't even want that. Like, as much as it's like funny,
I know.
But the U.S. teams, like, they don't want to qualify for Worlds and have their World experience be in Cincinnati. Like, they go to Cincinnati anytime. You know, they want to go to places uncharted, so to speak. Like, well,
I wrote about this in the mailbag, and I really feel that if U.S. teams that qualify for this tournament, for example, are upset that it's going to be in Cincinnati, I think they should just book a vacation and go somewhere in the world that they want to go. And you know, I admit that may not be a popular opinion, but like, you shouldn't rely on this, you know, these international ultimate tournaments, which are a privilege to attend, by the way. And very few players actually get to attend, even in world clubs here where there's, you know, 4 or 5 teams that can qualify. You know, if you really want to take a trip with your ultimate teammates and your close friends on the team and go somewhere, you know, that you want to visit in the world, just go. International airfare is cheaper than it's ever been in the history of the world. So I think, here's the thing. WIFDIF put this out to bid. They awarded the bid to the UK, and the UK backed out. And with the time that they had to pull it together, given COVID and everything else, they felt it was very important to make sure that the event was going to take place successfully. So they went back to the 18 organizers, Dale Wilker, Roger Oakes, probably, you know, two of the best organizers that we have in the United States and in the world, that ran a really great event in 2018. I know people remember the indoor stuff. The fact that that even worked out is a sign that there was a successful, you know, tournament organizing team that was able to make that happen at the last possible minute. But that was an extremely well-run event, and I think it's important. I think it's more important in my mind for teams' experience to include that, you know, to include a very well-run, logistically sound tournament. Because look, Lecco is beautiful. It's an absolutely gorgeous place. Italy is a great country to visit. I'm sure that the U.S. teams that went to Lecco in 2014 were happy to go. However, the tournament, you know, organization was a total nightmare. It was a total disaster. I mean, the sort of like cheap accommodation campsite, it was unbelievably bad, right? By the end of the week, the bathrooms were like unusable, for example. And like that stuff really mars the experience more than being in Cincinnati, you know? So that's just, that's my personal thoughts on the matter. And so, yeah, I mean, I get it. It's going to be frustrating, I'm sure, and expensive for some players, you know, who are going to play on a Beach Worlds team and on their, you know, the club team that qualifies for WUCC and potentially even on the World Games team for their country. People who have to travel to the U.S. 3 times in the span of, you know, 4 months, that's not the best. I mean, I guess at least the World Games folks would be able to stay in the U.S. between the World Games happening at the beginning of July and the World Club Championships happening at the end. So, thoughts, Keith?
I guess for American folks, like, I can't find a ton of sympathy if you like are going to play on 3 Worlds teams to like feel really bad for you, I guess. I understand. I don't want to invalidate, you know, hey, you know, I worked really hard to get here and this was the type of experience I expected and wanted and that others like me got, and I'm not going to get it. I can appreciate that, but like, you don't have to play on every Worlds team if you don't want to. Your team doesn't have to go to the World Club Championships if you don't want to. So I'm sure there will be other teams glad to take it. International folks, I think maybe it's a little bit of a different stripe, especially if you're going to play across multiple different teams and where communities are smaller. And I think it's maybe a little bit more required to ask the same people to like represent the country at all these different areas. That's a little bit of a different kettle of fish. But
yeah, and keep in mind the World Games schedule is not set by WFDF. The fact that it's happening in the U.S. this year, it normally doesn't.
Unfortunate coincidence, I think.
And Beach Worlds, would you rather have it in the U.S. or not have it at all? Because those would be the options. It's already been postponed from 2021.
Yeah, and I think it's as is the case with so many occasions in Ultimate. How many conferences and regionals have been scheduled, and everybody complains about where they are, and it turns out nobody else submitted a bid, but the team that they found, and the team that they found was one that the organizer had to beg to submit a bid at all. Most of the time, everybody wants everything to be perfect without committing any actual resources and work to doing that. So this was, in some ways, one of those situations. This was obviously, again, an extenuating circumstance where there was a really short timeline to figure it out. But tournaments are only going to be hosted in places that want to host the tournament, mostly. So we need more of those and more people willing to organize, as you've been pointing out, in order to achieve that. So before you complain about it, think about what you could have done to help make it differently, I guess.
All right, well, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we'll be joined by Alyssa Weatherford. And after that, we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming club season, where things stand, and interactions with semi-pro, etc. So stay with us. You're listening to Deep Look.
Today's Deep Look is brought to you in part by Elevate Ultimate. Elevate is a youth-focused disc sports organization based out of Vancouver, Canada, that is leading the way in helping kids discover and flourish in disc sports. And they've got a great new book, The Art of Coaching Youth Ultimate, that can help you do the same in your community, from how to recruit kids to how to manage problematic behaviors to running a practice. There's lots of great chapters with great content in the book, including one of my favorites, which is the one about making practices engaging for kids. You can find out more and check out the book for yourself, either by searching The Art of Coaching Youth Ultimate at Amazon or by going to elevateultimate.com and checking under the resources tab. Thanks to Elevate for their support of Ultiworld and Deep Look.
Joining us now on Deep Look is longtime Seattle Riot player, multiple-time Ultiworld All-Club selection, Alyssa Weatherford. Alyssa's done a ton of coaching in the sport, has coached at the U20 level for the national team for in 16 and 18, and we're excited to have her on the show. Hi, Alyssa.
Hi.
How are you?
Oh, doing pretty good.
Good. Are you feeling like you're optimistic for the upcoming, return to play? Everybody's in a little bit of a different spot. So how are you feeling about that?
I'm not that optimistic. I don't know, for at least national play, maybe local, regional play. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's fair. So I guess, one thing as we kind of talk, we'll talk about Riot and Ultimate and the upcoming season in a second, but you've gotten very into disc golf over the last year or so. I just saw your latest ratings update. You're coming up on the 900 mark, 892, moving on up. And, you've been kind of one of the players from the Ultimate world that has really excelled in the disc golf universe. So how have you been playing disc golf before the pandemic started, or did you pick it up, as Ultimate went away and you were looking for some disc sports action?
I started in mid-June 2020. I have never I've thrown like a disc golf disc one time before, like in college. And I was like, whoa, I don't know how to do that. So I just left it alone. And I played like disc golf in like college, but like with an Ultra Star, not with disc golf discs.
Now, I know personally from my experience, like trying to learn how to play disc golf, I found obviously having the skill set that Ultimate develops helpful, but also some habits that I had that were really hard to break, ways of throwing the disc, feeling like I had to throw around a mark, like those sorts of things. How challenging was it to build the skill set that you needed for disc golf with your Ultimate skill set as a starting point?
Yeah. It was hard at first. Like, I don't know, I went and played with some of my friends, and they're like, you're not throwing it outside in. I'm like, I am throwing it outside in. They're like, no, you're not. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what else to do. This is what it feels like to throw outside in, at least for an Ultra Star, because it's like much more subtle. But I don't know. There's a group of us in Seattle who are Ultimate players who all started playing. And we just started playing like pretty much every day. And just kind of through trial and error, watching a few like Paige Pierce YouTube videos. And then I've made friends with a couple organizers, disc golf organizers in Seattle, and playing with them has been helpful also, and getting to know them through the like kind of smaller disc golf community in Seattle.
Do you find it jarring at all to have now won $1,265 playing disc golf, compared to Ultimate, where we see the balance go in the opposite direction?
Yeah. People have asked me about, it's nice to win money, but I still think like the community that I have created within Riot is like more valuable to me. $100. Like for me, Riot is like the family that I had to like grow up on, starting to play when I was 20, that like I wouldn't trade that for money.
Oh, I was just gonna ask what the dollar amount is. What's the price tag on your Riot experience?
I don't know what would get me to trade my Riot experience. Like people that I have developed like strong relationships, and also I don't think I would be good at disc golf without like my ability to compete. Like I was thinking about that when I first started playing disc golf tournaments. Like I played my first tournament after playing disc golf for 2 months or something. And I'm like, I'm not necessarily that great at this game, but I am experienced at I'm an experienced competitor, whether or not I'm an experienced disc golf competitor.
Do you expect to keep playing disc golf even after you return to the Ultimate field?
I'm still trying to decide. I did realize that when I was in Vegas, there was something about the competition level at Vegas that I like a lot, compared to like some of the smaller tournaments, which I think is a reason why I loved playing on Riot for so long, compared to like I could have played on, other teams and had different roles or whatever, and I don't really know. So I think this like kind of series of events that I'm about to go to in California, I think is kind of my like, I don't know, like my tester of like, do I like this? Do I like competing by myself? Do I like traveling for this? And then decide. But I also feel like I can like not play Ultimate this year and then decide. But I mean, I've been playing club for, I don't know, 13 years or something like that. And I'm in my mid 30s, that I'm not quite sure that I am like still like wanting to put in as much work as it needs, as like as Ultimate has like become more athletic and faster, and like you just need to put a lot more work in. Especially someone who like my strengths have never been my athleticism, that like that doesn't necessarily keep you in the game anymore. Like you used to be able to. So
like, are you thinking about retiring from Riot? I mean, is that what I'm hearing right now?
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, go ahead, Keith.
No, go ahead, Charlie.
I was just going to ask, like, where's your head at right now for, with what's going on with Riot? And maybe we should just start with that. Like, what have you heard from the team? I know you're not going to be captaining this year, What are you hearing from the team about this upcoming season as teams are kind of figuring out what their plans are?
Yeah, I mean, I just like, I'm like I've been pretty conservative with like return to play and COVID stuff. I've like turned down coaching positions in Seattle, even if like people have like felt like it was safe. And like, I just feel unsure about like traveling in groups of people, and playing a sport where you're like breathing on each other. That, that I'm just like not sure. And also, yeah, I don't know like what counts as like safe or not. I feel like that's like what I'm like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of us don't know. And so I feel unsure about like what I'm going to do in regards of Riot this year. And also, Riot is still figuring out what we're doing. So, and no one has to have had made that decision one way or another yet. So I guess that's why I'm still like doing that, but I'm going to be gone for all of May and like the beginning of June. So I don't know.
I think that the challenges that you're talking about as far as like defining what safe is individually and as a group is something that a lot of teams are going through. To give the audience a sense of what it's like where you are. What is the playing environment been like in Seattle? Are people playing that you know of? Are there leagues going on? What's the environment like right now?
I feel like for the most part, there's been very little. There's like certain pockets of people that I know are playing like mini or Gulti. I think in the last month, it's been happening. There's more. The like COVID numbers in Seattle are relatively good. And now more and more people are getting vaccinated. And in Seattle, it seems like majority of people want to get vaccinated, which I think is also a piece of it. But I think for the most part, like most people that I know have really not been playing until like the last maybe month or two. But I know, I mean, there was a high school league that did a play ultimate with masks on with like 6 teams or something. But I think besides that, there's been no leagues of any kind since February, like 2020.
Right. When, just talking Riot now, you go back, you think about trying out for the team back in the mid 2000s and you start playing with the team in 2007. And, you've had this long uninterrupted run until COVID of, competing on this exceptionally good ultimate team. What are some of the standout memories for you from that time, that 13 years?
Yeah. I mean, one of them was like, both playing at Worlds in 14 and 18 in Lecco and in Cincinnati, there's like moments in which both of those tournaments where like, I feel like we came very prepared to be surprised. And in both situations, we were very surprised. Certain things, like in Lecco, like the first day of the tournament was canceled. And like me and Roar, I couldn't sleep. And I was like looking on Twitter or something in the middle of the night and saw someone on Sockeye post about how the tournament's canceled. I was like, what? And I like looked at my email. There was no communication. And then I heard Rory like rustle. I'm like, Rory, do you have an email from are we playing tomorrow? So then we started like looking into it. There was like no communication. And then we were like, it was like 4 a.m. So we're like, we're not going to wake everybody up, because then people won't be able to go back to sleep. So we're just like, okay, I guess we just wait and make sure. And then and then the schedule got changed and things like that. And then the same thing with like, obviously with Cincinnati with like, all of a sudden we're playing indoors, which isn't really anything that we've ever practiced. But I think both of those moments I feel like are ones where like we very much expected the unexpected. And I really think that everyone on the team did such a good job at just rolling with it. And it was just like really like fun to be a part of a community that's like, all right, whatever, like this is the situation that we're in, so we're gonna go out and do it anyways. And then I think just like the first year of being on the club team, I think I was very much like, this was like when they could like take a project. I was definitely a project when I was 20. Like I had some like skills and I like tried really hard, but like definitely not at like a high club level. And like learning like how much better how good I can get just by coming to practicing with people who are really better, as someone who like really did not play very much during competition, like a few points a day. And like being able to have that experience, I think has helped me coach and captain and like have conversations with players. Cause I think a lot of people don't necessarily like know that about me. Like, and I think when I coach too, like people don't necessarily see me as someone who has experience as being like the kind of rookie bottom of the roster type player. And I think that has really helped a lot in ultimate. And then I think also with disc golf of being like, I do not know what's going on and like being able to figure it out.
You know, another place that you've had a lot of experiences in your coaching career, you know, coaching at the youth level, coaching national teams, coaching the Western Washington team, the women's division, at the college level as well. That Western Washington team, you know, not necessarily like a powerhouse program, but suddenly, you know, you have this team that's able to compete with really well-established programs that have a long history of success. How difficult was it to try and build up a program like that to be able to go toe-to-toe with these really established college teams?
I mean, I think like specifically that 2019 team was like, it was it was a multi-year project. I mean, and like ever since I was an alumni, like when I was started at Western, we were like barely even qualifying for regionals. And kind of, I think that I think the consistency of coaching for years makes a difference. But also I think the same thing, the ability that they're willing to trust each other and me in like situations that we may or may not be able to practice. Like I think one of the first years that we went to nationals, like Chaos has only gone a few times. I don't know. One team was like, you guys have a lot of zones. I'm like, well, we technically only have one zone. I call everything a 3-person cup with alterations. So like, I feel like, you know, being able to like figure out what makes sense for them, so that like, even though like it looks like we have a 4-person cup and a box and one and a junk and all this stuff, we call everything 3-person cup and with adaptations for specific teams. And I think that kind of idea like can like really, I don't know, empower athletes to like take ownership over this like role that is given to them, whether or not they've practiced it, and like practicing being able to perform without practicing. I think it's huge because like when we played Dartmouth in that quarterfinals, the specific junk and zone that we played, we didn't practice because we don't have Jack and Claire and Caitlin and like those type of players on our team. So there's no way to practice that.
Right. Do you expect to want to continue to coach even as you potentially move away from elite club?
Yeah, I think coaching has like been like, I think a big passion of mine. And I definitely still want to coach, whether I'm actually competing or not. And I don't know exactly like what teams or like what that looks like. But I know since I got my master's degree in coaching and working as like a coaching director and kind of mentor for Seven Hills coaching, we've kind of changed our structure around how we hire coaches since I've been doing that. I don't know. I think the other thing I'm like really passionate about is like giving young people who are excited about the idea of coaching the tools to be able to like start coaching career. And like, I think that to me is also like something that I'm pretty passionate about, is helping people even see themselves as someone who could coach.
I'm curious to hear more about that. I think that coaching, as someone who coached myself, I think you've even been to one of my practices before. Like, I think that it's a great way for players to see the game in a different way. But I'm curious to hear more about, you mentioned that you've changed the way at Seven Hills that you're going about bringing in new coaches and that you want to give new coaches the tools. Can you talk more about what those tools are and how Seven Hills has had to adapt in order to help bring in new coaches?
Yeah. So the first year of Seven Hills, we hired 10 coaches, and including the 3 founders, me and Sarah Griffith and Shannon O'Malley. So 7 other people, and all people who had tons of coaching experience and like really like high level coaches in Seattle. And we're like, okay, this is what we want. Like, these are the type of people we want to coach these teams. But just, for whatever reason, some coaches just weren't into the passionate about the program as others, which was fine. But after that year, Shannon, Sarah, and I all decided that we wanted to try a new model because, well, 1, we wanted to develop new people as coaches, and 2, we just didn't think that was working. Like, there was a huge difference in retainment of players on teams that like had coaches that were obviously excited about the program versus players who were coaches that were just coming to coach and then leaving and not thinking about the program outside of that. So instead we decided to have me not coach and start developing a coaching training program while people are coaching and doing coaching trainings before and during the season. And then one of my main jobs is like coming to the practices and observing coaches coach and like having conversations with them and being able to answer questions and giving them advice and like really helping them develop their coaching personalities and figuring out like what works for them. And some of these ideas came from my master's program at UW. Like, I had to have someone observe me coaching, and I had Hannah Kawai observe me, who's like someone I've known since I was 15, really good friend. And I still was so nervous to have her watching me coach that I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize how terrible this would be. And then since then, we've been able to hire alumni from the program and other people who like don't really have a coaching experience, but are like just excited about learning how to coach. And it's been like really amazing to see the development of people and then also the retainment of these teams where it's really just about the right people and not like necessarily the coaching experience is the number one priority.
Just quickly, can you tell, for those that don't know, what is Seven Hills Ultimate Club?
Oh, Seven Hills is like the 3rd iteration of Youth Club in Seattle. So Moho was the like player run program. Then there was Fries or Small Fries, which was very much parent run. And then when Fries ended, Sarah Surge and I started like a program that was like a little bit more business. Like, we have a business license and like we're like running it. So yeah, youth club program.
So I mean, it's been interesting watching the Seattle youth club scene and like the YCC saga that we've kind of seen play out over the last couple of years. The city not getting a lot of bids to YCCs for sort of political reasons with USA Ultimate. How does Seven Hills fit into that? And sort of what's the goal of kind of having this developed youth club program in the city?
So Seven Hills, Dis Northwest, and Age Up very much work together and really try to make sure that like we're serving youth in the best way we can, but not overlapping, and really much collaboration over like what people are focusing their energy on, so that like not one of us is like trying to do everything, which I think often doesn't work for a long period of time. It might work for a short period, but doesn't seem sustainable in most situations. So, I mean, we're in like constant communication with Dis Northwest over like what makes sense. And like when Dis Northwest decided to not like submit bids for YCC in 2020, like, I think some people were like worried when we then announced that we were submitting bids. I think some people were worried about like, well, is this because like, is this a conflict, or is this like, what is this? And so like having to make sure that people understand that like, you know, we were not undercutting Dis Northwest, and we were in communication, and we were making sure that it was like very much a joint effort, and like Dis Northwest was going to like help us with fields and like and help us with logistics and things like that with the experience that they have running that program. And like kind of that, you know, one of our goals is to be giving like kind of high level competition opportunities for youth, while Dis Northwest is focusing on school teams and development. And so that like every kid has access to Ultimate, whether it's through different programming, just depending on the fit that makes sense for them. And also we try to make sure that we don't do things on the same days. Even like our practices are usually on Sundays. And like when they started doing high school mixed a few years ago, try to have games on Saturdays so that like, we're not like asking kids to like have to work, like pick one or the other.
I feel like Seattle's often held up as like the shining example of how you can grow Youth Ultimate, how you can reach people that otherwise most Ultimate communities have not been able to gain access to. And I've also heard, you know, so as someone who's from Atlanta, like I've heard other people say we can't do what Seattle does. It's just different here. Do you think that the Seattle model, so to speak, of developing Youth Ultimate is replicable in other places?
Yes. I think that it takes a lot of time and effort. And I think it has to be like the foundation has to be relationship building. Like, I think that's a huge thing with like what Age Up has been able to do. And then like also like the reason that Seven Hills was able to do what we do is like we had conversations with people through Dis Northwest and Age Up and other people in the community before we just like, this is what we think is the best way to do it. Even though Shannon, Serge, and I all have experience in youth club as players and as coaches through Moho and Fries. But I think that foundation of relationship building is really important. And I think that often that step is overlooked because it takes a lot longer and it doesn't lead to what you imagine in your head as fast. If you take the time to like make sure you're talking to even like people outside of the Ultimate community, like community center directors and like other youth programs, so that like in schools and all these different people, and it takes much more time to do that. But I don't think there's any reason why that steps that Seattle has taken cannot be replicated somewhere else. I also think that, you know, I don't think it's necessarily the right fit for every city either, but I don't think there's a reason why it can't be like an offshoot of any of those things, even if it looks different depending on the city that you're in and the demographics and the whatever is going on. But I think that it's like a bunch of years of pre-work before you get to actually see the product that you are imagining in your head.
Delayed gratification.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's hard. And especially when people, I feel like traditionally in sports, people don't want relationship building to be a foundational step.
Mm-hmm. You know, one more question on coaching here. What do you think, like, how can we develop the next generation of coaches? And I don't really mean specifically in Seattle, where clearly, you know, you have resources and, you know, your abilities to kind of do this development directly. But like, if you think about it from a national perspective, how do we get more people into coaching and staying with it and, you know, helping to build the next college team or the next youth team?
I mean, I think a lot of it is like, it's the same. I mean, I think like, I don't think that I'm like that unique that like no one else can do what I'm doing. Like, I think it's like telling people that they like, I think the biggest barrier for like, say, even team leadership or captaining is yourself. Especially in my opinion, women often like, unless you literally tell them they can do it, I think most women will self-select out. I mean, I remember the first time, like having Miranda Roth nominate me for a captain when I was like 21 on Riot, which was ridiculous. But like the fact that she even nominated me is like that step of like me seeing myself in that role, which I think is the hardest thing for a lot of people. And I think that step, and then having like mentors, like instead of having to like fail and fail and fail, there's only so many people that are going to like fail as much as you do when you first start coaching and continue with it without like mentorship or a community of coaches to like work with and bounce ideas off and like learn from each other. So I think that like that, and I think that's something that more people like can do. And I'm definitely like interested in also working with other coaches who could see themselves in that role and like giving them more opportunities. Like not everyone needs to go spend money on a master's degree to do this. Like I'm happy to like share. And I think that's something with Seven Hills too. Like we're happy to always like give out our like information that we have developed, like our budgeting and we have like I make all my coaches write down their practice plans as much as they hate it and submit it into folders. So we have like 6 years of every single practice plan for different levels of teams. Like we have a bunch of this stuff that we like always are telling people that we're more than happy to like share. And I think that's like where I think the one of the things I think is important is that we think about the development of the community that we're trying to develop over winning tomorrow's game. Like same thing with like college women's. Like I care more about the growth of college women's than like Western Washington winning tomorrow if it meant like I shared some information with a coach about something. And maybe my team doesn't agree with that mindset, but like I mean, literally at tournaments, I've like talked with coaches about certain strategies that I've then seen them use down the road. And I care more about that than winning, even though I'm also very competitive. It's just like a balance, you know, like I also want to win, but I also care a lot about the people, like younger people coming up through as coaches and athletes.
Hey, Alyssa, how do we beat Western Washington tomorrow?
Well, you can't ever guess what we're going to run because we don't ever do the same thing on defense.
It's a tricky line to walk because, you know, as a coach, a lot of times you can have the big picture view. And like I often tell the players, like it's my job to have the big picture view in some ways. But for them, it's like, well, it's my junior year and I have 2 more years. Like it's not really going to matter to me 4 years from now what's going on. So it can be a tough sell, but I think once you get the buy-in, it's pretty valuable to create a community. And it's something that I've been talking about and thinking about a lot, particularly right now, because I've expressed on the show a couple of times my concerns about what's going to happen to less stable programs in college and potentially even youth programs, but especially women's programs that tend to have less infrastructure and less background, smaller numbers. Like I'm very concerned about what's going to happen coming out of the pandemic. And I hope people have the kind of attitude that you're talking about, the long-term, the community will be stronger if we work together, even if it's to my competitive disadvantage. I hope that people have that attitude. I may have to talk to you about, you know, some of these Seven Hills resources and see if we can get them in the hands of college teams and potential coaches. You're getting more people to help these teams as they go through such a tough transitional period.
Yeah, I mean, with younger people, coaches and players, I feel like giving people the space where they can make mistakes and like not be like remembered for that mistake for the rest of their careers. I don't know. Like I think that's like a huge piece. I think that is scary for people when they first start coaching.
So, you know, just to go back to Riot for a second, you know, this has been a great run for this team. 2 World Club Championships. You already mentioned those and sort of the weird circumstances of both of those tournaments. But, you know, Riot hasn't won a national championship in quite a long time. What do you think, you know, has that diminished your experience at all playing for the team? And you know, what do you think has held Riot back from getting all the way to the top, given how good the team has been and making the finals many, many times?
Yeah, I think my opinion is that we've the reasons that we have lost at nationals have been different every single year, despite what other people may or may not think. Like, I think, like, some years I'm like, it would have been a shot in the dark, like, whether we would have actually won or not. Like, we were not necessarily the better team. And, like, where we would have had to play, like, the game of our life, and maybe the other team would have had to play a pretty bad game for us to win. And then, like, some years maybe, like, we were the better team, and for whatever reason it didn't work out in our favor. But I think it's been different every single year. And I forget the other part of your question. Does it diminish my experience? And I don't think so. Like, I mean, like, yes, I would love to have won nationals at some point during my 13 years of playing on Riot. But also a lot of people don't even get to be in the semis or the finals. And, like, I think often, like, people overlook that. And I think it's kind of like, I don't know, like a thing of, like, when I'm complaining about not winning nationals, or like Riot should win. I mean, it's hard to even get to the semis. And now even it's hard to get into the quarters. Like, the women's game is much deeper than it was when I first started playing club. And it's an achievement wherever you end up. And I think that, like, this mindset where, like, I don't know, winning or and everything else is bad is, like, a mindset that's, like, not going to lead to winning. I mean, and like I said, I don't even know what I would trade for my experience on Riot without winning a single gold medal. And there's like plenty of other, I would say the vast majority of Ultimate players, have also not won a national championship. I also think the development of the women's game has become so much more, like, deep. There's so many more teams and storylines that I think that often the storyline of, like, say Riot and Fury or Riot and Brute Squad or whatever it is like, I don't know, not really the whole story anymore, like it was in like the late 2000s or mid 2000s. Yeah.
Do you think that trend is going to continue? Do you think the days, I mean, we're still kind of seeing many of the same teams conglomerate to the top, even that group has gotten bigger. And certainly, when it comes to the final podium, the gold medals seem to keep falling into the same team's hands for shorter runs than, Fury had a really, really long run, but, there was Scandal and Brute Squad and Fury again. So, like, we've still seen these kind of, like, little runs of teams, but do you think that time is coming to an end of just a group at the top kind of gatekeeping the rest of the teams from really being able to access that top level?
I mean, I think it's already changed. Like, in 2019, I can't remember what year it is. 2019, I mean, Schwa 76ers semi would not have been one that I don't know anyone who would have guessed that it was going to be a 76ers Schwa semifinal. I mean, like, and I think that's, like, the thing is, and I think a lot about this with Chaos or with Western Washington. I was like, I don't want us to be okay with crumbs anymore. Like, when we're like, oh, we beat a national qualifying team at some tournament, like, great, like, we did our job, good, but I don't want us to settle for crumbs. And I want, like, more teams in the women's club division and in college to, like, be hungry. And I think that's, like, what Schwa and 76ers shown. They showed that, like, they could have close games with elite level teams earlier in the season, and that wasn't good enough for them. And it showed at nationals. And I think that is, like, a very clear example of, like, a lot of teams can put together that game if they believe that, like, just staying with and losing to, like, some of the historically top teams isn't good enough, without necessarily, not putting anything down, but, like, just being, like, seeing that as something that's a possibility than just, like, oh, I'm thankful for just being here. Now whatever happens is fine. But, like, really truly believing that you can win and not just, like, hang with.
I kind of want to ask a follow-up. Sorry, Charlie, if that's okay. Because I know you're someone who's super competitive. How do you find the balance between, finding that hunger to win and really compete with the best teams and measuring your success by whether or not you do win.
Yeah, I guess I think when I was younger, I had a much less healthy version of competition and competing. And like, I often joke that I'm kind of glad there's not as much footage of me playing college ultimate, because I wasn't necessarily the best competitor that I think. And like, but as I've like grown up, I just feel like, I don't know, it's like a hard question, but I like really value the competitors. And like, I want to win knowing that the other team is playing their best game. I don't want to win because the other team is sucking. Like, that to me isn't fun. Like, I want to win knowing that like the other team played their best and I attempted to play my best, and like, that's what I want. Like, I think often, like in 2015, I think Brute Squad was the better team. And I think like we could have won, but I think like I didn't want them to play bad so that we could win. Like, I wanted us to be able to really, truly compete with them, and play the game that I knew we were capable of, but I knew that was going to take a lot of pieces all together. And I didn't want them to like drop the disc so that we could score. Like, that's how I feel like I think about it, is like, I value competing against the best, playing their best game.
Who is the best player that you've played with in your career?
Oh, I don't know. Gosh. I mean, I feel like best is hard to really quantify, but I feel like, I mean, Miranda Knowles or Miranda Roth, I feel like is someone who like, not only was a dominant player, but also like as a leader of the team. And I think and was one of the players that started like this trend of Riot players coaching youth. That I think all those things to me like make a very best player. And the fact that like, not only was she like winning championships with Riot, she was like coaching high school kids after like the same week. That like, I don't know. And I think that to me is valuable. But I don't know. I've played with a lot of really good players that it's hard to choose.
It wouldn't be a super interesting question if it were super easy.
Yeah,
that's my kind of answer is Miranda Roth Knowles, because I talk her up a lot, and now I think these young kids don't know anymore.
No, they don't know. I mean, they don't even. I mean, but then I start sounding like Dominique Fontenette, because she always is like, "You guys don't know whoever," and I'm like, I know, but kids now don't even know who like Miranda is. So like, you know, it's just the way that it is going.
Charlie asking the hot seat questions early. Do you need to start the hot seat, Charlie? Do we have to get the hot seat ready now?
Are we doing the hot seat?
I think we should.
All right, Alyssa, we're gonna put you on the hot seat, but
Great.
we're gonna do that for our subscriber bonus segment. So, does that sound good? We take a few quick hitters.
Oh, sure.
Great. All right. Well, we'll join you again in our subscriber bonus segment. Thank you for joining us here on the show, and looking forward to seeing you on the disc golf course, on the Ultimate Field. We'll see what happens later this year, but you got the big West Coast swing coming up for disc golf. You excited to do that?
Yeah, I am very excited. I'm nervous about it, but yeah, I'll be playing my first one at the Challenge at Goat Hill in San Diego in like 3 weeks.
I'm going to be commentating that tournament on the Disc Golf Network. So maybe I'll see you on the lead card on Sunday.
Yeah, maybe. I'd have to just play my best. But there are some other Ultimate players that are also playing in the FPO division at that tournament, and a few of these other California tournaments.
Have you been in touch with, Ella Hansen, who I know is up in the Pacific Northwest, or some of the other players? I think you all had a picture together at Vegas earlier this year.
Yeah, me and Leah and Ella. I'm in contact with Ella. I mean, I've known Ella. I coached Ella for 3 years in high school, and then coached against her like when she was at Oregon, because we in Oregon and Western play each other constantly. So
sure.
And Ella's actually coming up. There's a CTAC, a tournament in Seattle that's like a pretty big for the area tournament. May 1st and 2nd, and she's going to come up for that. So I'm excited to have her come up there to kind of like, CTEC's kind of like my home course that when I'm in Seattle, I play like every day. So it either can be really good or really bad.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. And thanks for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Great to hear from Alyssa. Again, she'll be back with us for our subscriber bonus segment, so please join us for that. You can become a subscriber for less than $4 a month at ultiworld.com/subscribe. Keith, I thought Alyssa's comments specifically on coaching were very interesting, and I would love to see, we talked with her a little bit off the air, thinking about potentially trying to get even more into teaching other coaches to coach. That's something that I think we need more of in Ultimate. And as we continue to try to grow the game from the ground up, right? Grassroots style, more youth teams, more college teams, we're going to need coaches to fill all those roles. And I think having high quality coaches that are able to, get that kind of guidance from people who've been doing it for a long time is going to be a part of finding that next generation.
You and I had a conversation about kind of the chicken and egg of coaching and organizing and the folks required to help grow Youth Ultimate versus growing Youth Ultimate through participation. Was that on the show? I can't even remember now. Or was that off air?
I don't know. It's plausible we had it on the show.
If we didn't, Charlie and I discussed it, and I kind of brought up the point that there's some approaches where it's like, okay, we need to grow the number of kids playing Youth Ultimate, but what do you need for kids to play Youth Ultimate? You need adults organizing their events and supervising them and teaching them how to play and managing their teams and things like that. And where do you get those adults from? You get that from people who grew up playing Ultimate and are passionate about the sport and things like that. So there is a little bit of chicken and egg, and I think that maybe is a challenge for other communities to replicate what Seattle has. Seattle has enough coaches where they can have coaches on coaching the coaches. And not a lot of communities are struggling to find anybody to coach at all. And, one thing that I do really like about Alyssa's approach is that she talks about helping other people in other communities, that reaching out beyond where they are now to help grow those coaching resources for others is something that she wants to pursue. And I think that's really commendable. And I think I've said many times that I think there's not enough of a coaching community, enough of coaches interacting with each other to learn from one another. So to hear that, there's people who are thinking about that out there is always, I think, really good for me, especially somebody who has the level of coaching acumen that Alyssa has.
Right. And, we'll see whether she's going to play with Riot this season. This kind of brings us to the upcoming club season and starting to figure out, where do things stand as we get ready for this club season. We've started to reach out to some top teams to kind of get the feel on the ground for where things are. And I think you're seeing stuff kind of all over the place. Some teams haven't even really necessarily talked about it all that much yet. Seems like potentially that's like, at least what we heard from Alyssa, that's like maybe where Riot is at right now. And other teams have been, kind of getting more prepared and planning for a full season to begin. So I just want to kind of share what I know so far about where things stand. And I think, we're still going to see things be a little bit fluid here over the next few months, and that this all sort of assumes that there's going to be a full uninterrupted club season, which that's an assumption. That's not a guarantee by any means. We wait to hear more from USA Ultimate very soon about, is the regular season going to begin in June? Are they planning to hold all the Triple Crown Tour events? And so here's what we know so far. Many of the top men's division teams that I've heard back from are planning to basically have a full looking season. Pony is planning to go to all of the Triple Crown Tour events if they're able to do so. Sockeye, I believe, is planning to go to some, but maybe not all. I've heard that same sentiment from Chicago Machine, Rhino, and waiting to hear from others. I have heard that some teams, particularly on the East Coast, are thinking about maybe not playing many of the regular season tournaments at all because they're going to be focusing more of their energy in the AUDL. And that's going to be a dynamic that, we'll have to see how it affects. It's going to be different in different cities. In New York, for example, Pony is going to be enforcing fairly, strict attendance rules at tournaments this year. That's going to make it difficult for some players potentially to play on the New York Empire and play in the Pony season, because the team feels basically that in the past, particularly in 2019, part of the reason that they weren't as successful as they hoped to be to try to defend their title run from 2018 was because they didn't have enough continuity with players throughout the entire season, because some folks were playing Empire up through the middle of August and not playing on the team. Other divisions are looking a little more unclear. The women's division, it looks like Washington, D.C. Scandal is not going to be playing this year for a variety of reasons relating to they have a lot of travel players normally that those players aren't going to be able to compete this year or don't want to. The team's basically going to take a gap year. And I'm hearing some rumors that Space Heater is going to be kind of like a step up this year, that it's coming back, and that, we may see some of the players from Scandal end up over playing in the mixed division. There have been rumors that Fury is also going to be taking the season off this year, but that's not confirmed. And the latest that I've heard is that Fury is still in discussions with the team about what they're going to do, and they haven't made a final decision as a team yet about what they're going to do this year. From other teams, it's been a little bit more mixed. Maybe there hasn't been many discussions about what's actually going to happen yet, but it seems to me, just like as a general rule from what I've heard so far, there's a lot kind of like more focus on playing a full season from top teams in the men's division than in the women's division, at least as we stand today here, in the middle of April. The mixed division, well, I haven't really heard from anybody yet, so I don't know. I think still waiting to hear back from teams for the most part. I wouldn't be surprised to see situations like Space Heater popping up, though, where, and we talked about this already, months ago, Keith, that maybe some players decide that they're not going to focus, on playing in the single gender divisions this year, more people playing in the mixed division. And, what that all means for the Triple Crown Tour events, I think still remains to be seen. So that's a lot of information, but that's what I know so far, Keith.
And to add to that, there have been a few teams that have, kind of tentatively put their hands up on social media. I can think of a couple women's division teams like Chicago Nemesis and Minneapolis Pop, who put out fairly similar, in some degrees. I think Pop even said that they use the language from the Nemesis announcement to say, like, we're asking people if they'd be interested in playing, but we're currently not planning on playing. In Vancouver Traffic, we saw that they are hoping to have a season, that they have captains, but they're still in the formative stages. We've seen those kind of announcements starting to pop up from teams, and it does feel like the women's division is maybe a step behind. And I wonder if in the mixed division, you're going to see more teams wait out the single gender situation, because that could influence how their seasons are going to go if they're gaining players from the single gender divisions. And you also may see some mixed teams that are like, screw that, we're having a hard cutoff. We're not second class citizens or whatever. We're not secondary to these other divisions. So I think that could be a dynamic that we play out on a small stage in some areas of the mixed division. But I almost wonder if, the AUDL has in some ways influenced the men's division into, being a little bit further ahead, being a little more galvanized, or if it's the other way around, if more players in the men's division were like, I'm ready to play, and that enabled the AUDL to move forward, and the lack of that in women's players and gender non-binary players who are participating in the professional leagues, the Western Ultimate League and the Premier Ultimate League, if the reticence of those players is being reflected both in their club structures as well as the semi-pro league structures, and that's just not present in the AUDL. I'm not sure what the cause and effect is there.
Sure.
Is it that the players are uncomfortable, or is it that the leagues themselves pushed forward and that changed the environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think the fact that the AUDL is planning to resume, begin its season in June, that almost necessarily forces men's club teams to start thinking about how they're going to plan their season, because you're having to make decisions about, are you going to try to prioritize AUDL and then club? Are you going to try to do both? Are you going to try to, have, more commitments to the club team and then ask for requirements about what players can do? And those kinds of decisions are not required in, the mixed and the women's divisions because of just the nature of the timeline right now. So it's a fair, I don't know the answer to the question you just posed. Is it players driving that conversation, or is it, the structure of the AUDL coming down and saying we're playing and that driving those conversations? It probably is some combination of those two, if I had to guess. But I think at the end of the day, I don't know that it necessarily makes that much of a difference. Like the fact that the AUDL is going to be the first thing back, right? So the first league back, that's going to be driving decision making for club teams in the men's division primarily because of just the need to have a plan for what it's going to mean for your season.
This feels to me like a potential danger point. This is a little red exclamation indicator right now that there feels like there could be a realm where we have a pretty traditionally competitive men's club season where we have the AUDL, and on the flip side, we have a women's division and potentially a mixed division where there's less of that traditional sense of competitiveness, where you have some teams and players that have opted out and it impacts the quality of play in the season, and you have no Western Ultimate League and no Premier Ultimate League. And what will that create as far as the discussions around equity in the sport? I feel like that could create a lot of friction, a lot of tension, and we've already seen how negatively those things can impact the sport and the community when people are at each other's throats. And it all, to be clear, it could also be indicative of a larger problem. I think it could show some systemic flaws that the ultimate community is not reckoned with yet. But I think there are going to be some hard questions to ask, especially if that's the direction that this goes. I think it's going to be a really difficult position for people to be put in, because you're going to have so much attention around the men competing in the division and not on other people, despite their hard work.
Yeah, I agree. I am worried about it, right? This is the kind of stuff that's concerning to me just across the board about, kind of emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic. Like, what's it going to mean for youth participation? What's it going to mean for lower level college teams without as much institutional experience or coaching? And it's a similar situation here. Is this going to be a blip on the radar? Is 2021, it almost doesn't matter, right? I think you could make that case that, let's say a bunch of teams take the year off and then everybody just comes back in 2022. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. People feel more comfortable. Things are hopefully fully back to normal at that point. And maybe it just feels like, this was just this one weird year. But I do worry about the loss of momentum. And we've already faced a significant loss of momentum. And then for that to compound if a lot of teams or, enough competitive teams, for example, decide not to play, what's that going to mean for the divisions going forward? And, what's this club season going to lead to in the future? I mean, these are hard questions. I don't necessarily have answers, and I don't really know like what the expectation should be. Obviously, players and teams are going to make decisions that make sense for them. But I think, a lot of people want to play. So if a club team decides it's not going to have a season, like where are the players on those teams that want to play going to end up? Do they end up just taking the season off? Do they create new teams? Like this could cause all kinds of upheaval. And I don't think we know today, like what it's going to look like. But I do think like it's fair to say that a lot of teams are planning to come back and even play in multiple Triple Crown Tour events. So that to me, I think is notable enough, right? Raleigh Phoenix, by the way, just saw this. Raleigh Phoenix is planning to get back to having probably a regular season of some kind, going to some of the August Triple Crown Tour events and playing in the postseason. So there's one women's division team that we've heard from that is planning to have a full season. So but what will this mean? Is this going to have downstream effects if there isn't a fully robust competitive season? Well, we haven't even talked about the Canadian teams. Like, will they even be able to play? Will they even be able to come down and play in U.S. tournaments? We don't know when that's going to be possible. Right now, Canadians can leave the U.S. or can leave the U.S. Canadians can leave Canada with a negative COVID test, but getting back into Canada is a very big pain. And it's very expensive. You have to quarantine and spend like $2,000 to be quarantined. I don't know if these rules are the same across the entire country or if only by certain provinces, but that's another thing. There's the Canadian teams are competitive, of course, and the Sixers was in the finals last year. So what's that gonna mean? I just think there's a lot of questions still, Keith.
Absolutely, and I hope we get more clarity, and I hope we mostly are swimming in the same direction when that time comes, because it could be really problematic if we end up in an environment where one subgroup of people who already has a lot of privilege is in an elevated position over the rest of the community.
Yeah, but on the other hand, like you want to allow people to play if they want to play. I mean, right? I think
it wouldn't necessarily be through fault of their own,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Of course, if you have information about what your team is planning to do, let us know. deeplook@olzworld.com, @deeplookpod on Twitter. We're still trying to gather information right now and be able to kind of like help teams coordinate, I guess. I know that some teams have been in communication with each other already. And I would expect that to happen, especially for the elite teams as we get a little closer to potential season. Right now, mostly teams are still not practicing or even doing anything. And I think it's very possible that sentiments will change kind of suddenly as people get vaccinated. I've certainly seen that here. Alyssa was saying that in Seattle, like in the last month, all of a sudden there's been a lot more mini, a lot more Goldtimate. That's been the story here in New York. And I think that it's very possible that that's going to be what other communities are experiencing as well as sort of vaccinations continue to roll out and people start to feel more comfortable getting back out and playing.
And it gets nice outside. That doesn't hurt. I mean, we've seen a few examples of teams playing each other. There was a college scrimmage between the Florida State and Florida men's teams. I think I saw some Edina High School play as well in Minnesota. So you're starting to see examples of people playing Ultimate publicly, which were pretty few and far between previous to this.
Right. All right. Well, that is going to do it for today's show. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back with Alyssa Weatherford in our sub-bonus segment, so join us there. And for Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.